Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you, my dear brother, for the introduction. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My dear brothers and sisters, it is an honor to be here with you this evening in this beautiful masjid, this beautiful big mosque, and this beautiful community. Despite this being a difficult occasion that we gather for, but it is an important time for us to reflect on what is happening and to think together about how we can best process the pain, the difficulty, and how we can best address this to our friends, in the public, and in our own minds. And before I get to the details of the topic at hand, I want to begin by reflecting a little bit about the foundational values that make us Muslim, that should guide us in crisis and in good times alike. So I'll take a few minutes to talk a little bit about these values. And these values that are the foundation of our faith are what make our faith so great. We often talk about the details. The details come later. What you wear, what you eat, what you don't wear, what you don't eat, what you do, all of these come later. They're important. But before we discuss these issues, and mostly when we talk Islam, we talk these details, we got to come back to the values, the principles that are Islam. The word itself, what does it mean? And I want to begin by reflecting on the phrase Allahu Akbar. Something we say in every adhan, in every prayer, in every rak'ah. Allahu Akbar. What does it mean? In English, we often translate it as Allah is the greatest. Sometimes it's translated as Allah is great. But if you want to be literal, neither of those translations are accurate. If I were to say Allah is the greatest in Arabic, and there are many Arabic speakers here, I would say Allahu al-Akbar. Is that not correct? And if I were to say God is great, as sometimes this is translated into, I would say Allahu Kabir. But it's neither of those. It's Allahu Akbar. The literal translation is actually Allah is greater. But it sounds like the sentence is not finished, and that's the point of it. Fill in the blanks, my dear brothers and sisters. It's a living statement. There's no period at the end of that statement. Allah is greater than what? You fill in the blank. There's someone ill in your family, and you think this is a great illness, Allah is greater. You have a loss in your family, and you think this is a great loss, Allah is greater. You have some financial difficulty, and you think it's a great financial difficulty, Allah is greater. Whether it is good or bad, Allah is greater. And so Allah is the greatest, and that's the ultimate functional meaning, but it's conjugated in a living sense so that you can engage this statement constantly. It's not something we say and we're done. It's something that is living and breathing and recurring all the time in our minds and in our hearts. And why is Allah greater than everything? Because it is Allah's will that is supreme. Anything that happens, good or bad, does not happen without God's will. What do we learn from that? We learn from that we may will something. We accept God's will, and we learn and we think about how we can interact. Because in that will is wisdom. And you know the story of Musa and Khidr, Musa alayhi salam and Khidr in the Quran. I won't go through that story, but it basically at the zenith, at the height, at the top professorship, at the top tenure of the prophecy of Musa alayhi salam. This is not in the beginning when he was an apprentice. This was at the end after he had delivered his entire message. He was the wisest man on earth in terms of the knowledge, the ilm. He had spoken with God. No one else before or after him had gone through that. And still, he was schooled by a man of God. And this is all how God described Khidr. On God's will, that you don't see beyond the eye sometimes. And he was asking him time and again, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And there was always wisdom in that. What this wisdom is, Allah knows, but we trust that there is wisdom. And the question is, how do we respond? We're delegated the part that's ours. We always worry about God's part. This is a problem of all human beings of all faiths, and we're not excluded from this. We tend to engage ourselves in God's realm, and we forget our own. God decides what happens and how it happens. And then our realm, he delegates to us how we respond to it. You can never will yourself into life. God willed that you be here. You had no control over who your parents were, into what ethnicity or bloodline you were born into, in what land, any physical characteristic. This is you. This is me. And we don't have full control or any control really on deciding me and you. What makes us think we actually have control in the external world? What we do have is the delegated ability and freedom to respond, to have a choice in how we respond to what God puts out there in the world. And so Islam becomes, the definition of Islam isn't, as we say, submission. Submission sounds like there's an element of coercion. You know, when you're playing with someone, wrestling, and they submit, right? You coerce them into that. Not surrender. Some people translate Islam as surrender. That beckons and hearkens, hands up. It's like a gun to your back, surrendering. No, Islam, the best definition for that term is acceptance. We accept God's will. We accept that God is supreme. That's one level. The second higher level is Iman. And that's often translated. These are all Muslim values. These are all the key values that we're going to build this conversation on. Iman is often translated as what? Faith. The belief in one God. The belief. You think about it, this isn't very accurate. Because if it were, then Iblis, the devil himself, would be a mu'min. Because the devil believes in one God. He knows that God exists. And he knows who God is. That can't be Iman. Iman is not the belief in one God. It's the trust in that one God. Trust. And that's exactly what Iblis lacked. That's exactly why he was cast from God's grace, and how all evil began, is when trust was lost. I'll give you a small little example about these two terms. If I were to tell my son, you're grounded for doing something wrong. Now he has an option. He can rebel or he can accept that my father has made this choice. And he goes up to his room. That's one level. But there's a better level. He can accept and in his heart trust that this is what's good for him. And now it's Iman. When you have Islam and Iman, these are all mental states, heart states. But then we get to the third level. This is where action comes in. And this is now Ihsan. And Ihsan means once you trust, once you accept God as the supreme being on earth. It isn't this military. It isn't this government. It isn't this politician. It isn't this media. It isn't this group of people. There is a God, and he is supreme. His will is supreme over all. And justice will always be served by this God. That's another key value we believe in. And then you trust in that 100%. Have no qualms in your heart or mind that justice will always be served by this master of the universe. Then comes the part now from the heart and the mind into action, into the hand. And here our faith gives us the value of ihsan, which means excellence in all that we do. Knowing that we accept and trust, now we act in the way of God. In everything that we do, we pursue excellence. In your relationship with your spouse, you pursue excellence. That's being a good Muslim. As a worshiper, there's a way to give salah where your mind is somewhere, your body is floppy, and another where you're stern and firm and your mind is in it. That's ihsan, that's excellence, that's the way of a Muslim. When you do your homework, when you're at the gym, that can be ihsan, excellence in what you do. You're being a good Muslim. And how you communicate on an issue when you pursue the highest levels and you give ihsan, your best. You're not just emotional, you're just not just spouting off, you're not just venting. That is your Muslim value of your ancestors, of your prophets, that Allah willed for you. Excellence. pursuing excellence. And so this is the task before us today. A, we accept God's will. We trust in his will. We have no fear of anyone. There are many values built on these things. And then we get ready to work, because that's the part that God is testing us in. Remember, I asked you, let's not put ourselves in God's place. Put ourselves in the place God delegated, which is what? How we respond to the world and to the events that he allows to happen. That's the part that we're tested with. And so now our only role is to think, there's a calamity, there's a crisis. How can we respond to it effectively with ihsan? On these values are built many other values. For us as Muslims, there's the value of respect for human life. There is the value of justice. There is the value of speaking truth to power and being fearless. There is the value of being fair-minded. And there is the ayah that gives us the recipe of success. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Two simple little statements are the key to success in anything we do. And abide by truth and abide by patience. Also means make it an ally. Let it be your first ally. We talk about alliances and coalitions. Well, we have one before any other. That is with truth, haqq, and with patience, sabr. But the real translations of these two terms go beyond just truth and patience. When I say haqq, yes, it's truth, but also it's fact, which means we are a fact-based people. We fact-check, we research, we're data-oriented. All of these things are part of our tradition of pursuing haqq. We don't fall for misinformation. We don't spread misinformation. We do tahqiq, which means research to find the facts in any situation. And we teach other people how to emulate these standards that we hold ourselves up to. But first, we have to hold ourselves up to these standards. And then when we talk about sabr, it's not just patience. Patience beckons the feeling of waiting, of being passive. But no, when we talk about sabr, when the Quran talks about it, it's patience with movement. It's discipline. It's going forward, always going forward, never staying still. But as you go forward, you don't lose breath. You don't lose stamina. You don't lose focus. You keep going, steady, discipline. What's happening today, in light of these values that we're going to think about as we discuss, is one of the greatest crises that we have seen in terms of the humanitarian element of it, and anywhere in the world in any moment in time. And before I discuss it, I want to take just a minute to express my condolences to all of you here, Palestinians who are here, especially those from Gaza, but really anybody from Palestine who has lost a loved one either recently or in the past. And I ask all of us to silently give a Fatiha on their innocent souls. May Allah accept all the martyrs, all the innocent souls in his wide and great paradise. Ameen. And then I want to pivot to a little bit of history, because what's happening today, and this is part of the problem, is being discussed through the prism of Saturday and the events of Saturday. But the first thing I would tell you in communicating about this issue is to never lose sight, and never let anybody lose sight. If you want to talk about justice, if you want to talk about human suffering, if you want to talk about the complexity of the conflict, it certainly didn't begin on Saturday. As the brother mentioned, it's been 75 years of occupation and oppression, and the results and the consequences of these two evil structures that much of the world has watched and stood by silently as they festered and their consequences festered. My dear brothers and sisters, they talk about it as a conflict. I've stopped using that term in the media because a conflict gives the impression of parity between the sides. But I submit to you that in this so-called conflict, we have one side that's occupying and one side that's occupied. One side that's oppressing and one side that's oppressed. One side that is displacing and one side that is being displaced. One side that is dispossessing and one side that is being dispossessed. One side that is occupying and oppressing and one side that's being occupied and oppressed. There's no parity in that relationship. Yes, every single, and this is one of, I go back to my foundational values, and I say them to you now unapologetically, because this isn't about you, it isn't about the media. The media is not here. But as a witness to Allah, through my values, yes, every single civilian life taken is a life I shed a tear for, regardless of which side, regardless of what religion or nationality. I stand for life, and I respect the sanctity of life. So let me make that ultra clear. But when it comes to the so-called conflict itself, there is no parity. And the fact that the media and the politicians and the spokespersons and the analysts have pretended for so long that there is some kind of parity, and even now have gone beyond parity to say, no, there's not even parity. There's one side that's civilized and living in peace, and one side that's terroristic and human animals. God, sorry to repeat those words, but these are words that are in the media today, uttered by a minister of the Israeli government about the Gazan population. The same population that today, living in this Gaza Strip, as the brother mentioned, the largest open-air prison in the world that's been under siege for 20 years. The siege now is being tightened, and the screws are being tightened ever more. 2 million people, human beings, families, mothers, fathers, children, being shot like fish in a barrel. Nowhere to go. After a long day of advocating and dealing with the media and giving talking points and coordinating with leaders around the country, I'm going home at night, 10 o'clock, hoping to get some rest. Turn on the BBC, probably a mistake. And I hear that they just announced, this was maybe yesterday or the day before, that they've ordered 1 million people, the entire population of North Gaza, to relocate to the south within 24 hours or else. Can you imagine just one family, your family, being booted into the streets overnight? Where would you go? Leave your house, leave your belongings, just get out. Where would you go? How would you go there? Now imagine doing it with an air raid. And imagine 1 million people doing it along with you, also having nowhere to go. It's insane. It's inhumane. It's catastrophic. It's a disaster, and that is not my opinion alone. The United Nations, as a neutral body, was quick to declare it as such, a human catastrophe, a disaster. And you would think in 2023, in this supposedly civilized era, this would be an easy point to understand, but apparently it isn't. And what's more frustrating is when we have elected leaders of what is supposed to be a modern civilized democracy like this country, the country that we're from, that we live in, these leaders who have completely turned their back on innocent civilians when it comes to Palestinians, not to others, not to those in Ukraine, not to those in Israel, but to those in Palestine, as they did to those in Syria. Unfortunately, we're seeing the double standard repeat itself time and again. And this isn't the first time. In every spat of violence, in every incursion, in every oppressive reiteration of the occupation, including settler violence that occurred in the summer of this year, including previous air raids on Gaza, including previous attacks on civilians in the West Bank, we've always seen the backs of the politicians. And we've always seen a double standard in the language when it comes to freedoms and human rights. One of the key values of our faith is freedom. Freedom for the human being. Even Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, the master of the universe, has allowed the freedom of choice as to whether you believe in him or you don't. If a human being chooses not to believe in God, they're left free by God. Have you ever seen somebody struck by lightning for not believing in God? They live their life. They have a chance up to the moment of death. Allah is patient with them. And he keeps giving them guidance. This is the love of Allah. This is the care of Allah to his creation. This is the dignity that Allah sees in a human being. That even he, in all his might and all his glory, is not quick to off someone who is not in agreement with him. And the opportunities come throughout their life, so that when they make the final decision, it's theirs and theirs alone. Just, it's merciful. But then humans come along, they get a little itty bit of power, and suddenly they think they're greater than God. But God is greater, Allahu Akbar. And they think that the moment you don't get in line, you don't jump on that bandwagon, and that bandwagon is not even condemned terrorism, because that's something nobody in this community supports. Terrorism. Nobody in this community has a placard saying I stand with it. But I run around Chicago and I see a lot of placards in a lot of different centers and synagogues, unfortunately, unapologetically saying I stand with Israel. Fine. That's your choice. It's a free country. But let me tell you what you stand for. You're telling me what you stand for. When I see the air raids, you're telling me you stand with that. Am I right? Am I making this up? When I see the hospitals being bombed, when I see 2,250 human beings being killed over the last few days, when I see 725 women and children being slaughtered, when I see tens of thousands of people on the floor in bathrooms and kitchens of what little hospitals exist because the 2,500 beds in all of Gaza and the hospitals are not enough, you stand with that. That's what you're telling me. And again, as a Muslim, tawasaw bil haqq, my ally is fact checking. I'm citing your position. I'm not being flippant, I'm not being emotional, I'm not being sarcastic, I'm not being exaggerating. I'm simply putting a mirror to what you're telling me. You're telling me I stand with that. You didn't say I stand with civilians. You didn't say I stand with peace. You didn't say I stand with justice. I would welcome that. You're saying I stand with Israel. If that's what Israel is doing, it's doing it in your name, and you're saying you stand with it. My dear brothers and sisters, there's no need to exaggerate, to be emotional, to be angry. Be specific, be clear. Dissect what you see and give it back. It speaks for itself. It speaks for itself. Now, if it doesn't speak very well, that's not my problem. That's going to be your problem because that's your choice. Remember, God delegated us a will. And every human being, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, atheist, they make choices. I have not chosen, and I don't think any of you have chosen, to stand with the murder of innocent civilians of any faith, of any nationality. But there are some in our community, in our society, in our country, in our world, that apparently are telling us that's what they've chosen to stand with. And yet, we're the ones being demonized. We're the ones being called terrorists. We're the ones that the politicians are afraid to engage and stand with, and they're rushing to go and stand with those who stand with these things. Well, then we know where they stand as well. So I think it's important in our messaging, and we're talking here about principled communication, to be clear in your position, and then to be clear and to force clarity on the position of anybody else who's talking to you or addressing you or talking about you. Because we're not fools. And nobody can really insult our intelligence. They've insulted our humanity. They're insulting our intelligence too. And what I'm seeing, and I tell you this as a media expert, as somebody who's been in the media work and communications work for 20 years, what I'm seeing today is hard even for me to comprehend. And I've seen the worst. I've seen the worst of Fox. I've seen the worst of the blogosphere. I've seen the far right. I've seen the far left. But what I'm seeing today is Orwellian, is out of this world. The only 3 Muslim anchors on American television were just sidelined from their positions. Their crime, they all condemned very clearly any harm done to any civilians on any side of the aisle. That wasn't the issue. The issue was perhaps they were giving too much context to the suffering of Palestinians. Factual, historical context. How dare they? How dare they educate the public? How dare they widen the conversation for people to understand the pain and the suffering and to understand the complexity? How dare they? Be simple. Be a simpleton. Parrot the talking points and go home. If you dare deviate from the script, get out of here. The only three. Now, the optics of that are terrible. You would think the optics of that would be enough to cause a producer or someone to say, you know what, we can't do this. This looks too bad. It looks too stupid. But no, it's done. And the statement that's issued is even more problematic. It adds salt to the wound. Oh no, this it was a coincidence. Coincidence? 100% of the Muslims on your TV station are sidelined all of a sudden in the wake of this. A coincidence? Oh, they get to report on other things. Well, how nice. Why did they lose their anchor positions? These are tip-top journalists. I'll name them. Ayman Muhyiddin, who's half Palestinian, half Egyptian. Mehdi Hassan, who's of Indian background. And Ali Velshi, I think, is of Indian background as well. Okay? All of them are Muslim. And all of them are great journalists, objectively speaking. This is not me being a biased person. There's no reason for them to lose their positions. Meanwhile, you have a chorus of the media in America sing the same tune, the same anthem, the same refrain of "We stand with Israel," and the other side are only terrorists, and completely ignoring and erasure is the word, erasing Palestine is the word. By reducing it, there are many tactics, but one tactic is reducing it to Hamas and forcing you to talk about it. As soon as you pop up on any TV station, you want to talk about the Palestinian, community, the Palestinian population, the Palestinian history, the Palestinian suffering. You want to, no. I don't want to hear any of that. I want to whittle it down to that one word and tell me what you think of that one word and go home. That's it. That's done. I'm not going to step into that frame. I'm not playing this game. Nobody here is a member of that organization, but they're all Palestinians. And that goes to the majority of Palestinians in the world. Let's talk about Palestinians. Let's talk about Palestine. Let's talk about the women and children. Let's talk about the men, the youth. Let's talk about the settler violence that targeted in this summer the men and the teenagers in all of his villages in the West Bank who were armed by the Israeli government and allowed to terrorize, if you like to use that word, these civilian populations. Let's talk about the hardship of movement, where families have to stand for hours, men, women, those who try to go to work from one village to another, from one border to another, just to feed their families. They're not militants. They're not terrorists. They're providing bread for a table for their children. They're feeding their children. That's what they're trying to do, like you try to do. And they have to be humiliated, and they have to be inconvenienced, and sometimes they have to be roughed up. And that's a daily living, a daily basis. The lack of access to health care, the lack of ability to import necessary medicines, the overflowing hospitals. And on top of all of this, as the air raids occur now and the carpet bombing, and there are horrible pictures of how these neighborhoods are razed to the ground, razed to the ground. They're cutting off water, food, electricity, fuel. If this is not an act of mass terror on a civilian population, what is? And in what world can any civilized individual, can any leader of any democratic country stand for that? Say, I stand with that. It's insane to me. It's completely inexplicable. And these are the points we need to make, my brothers and sisters. I don't like chants. I'm always upfront and honest with you. Spare me the chants. I hear the chants, spare me the chants. From the river to the, very nice. I don't want to hear the chants. I want to hear this detail. I want to hear the human stories. Don't make it easy for the other side. When you chant, it's like they're hearing nothing. You've been chanting for years. the same chance. It's noise. Talk about the facts. Talk about the human beings. Always talk about the human beings. That's what they're trying to erase. Existence is resistance. Talk about your families. Talk about your feelings. Talk about your loved ones. Talk about their hardships. Talk about their experiences. Talk about your cousins and uncles and aunts and everybody who's back home and what they're going through. Talk about your parents and grandparents and what they've been through. Center the human being. Our people are in the right when it comes to their desire to be free, their desire to survive, their desire to exist. We're in the wrong with the PR. You have a winning cause that all humans should gravitate around, but that cause is lost when the PR does not serve it well, when it's reduced to meaningless phrases that nobody understands what you're talking about and that really don't address the situation at hand and that moves away from centering the human. I'll go so far as to say it isn't even about Al-Quds. I hear all this conversation about Al-Quds. Look, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself said, the drop of the blood of an innocent human being, an innocent Muslim in this case, is worth more than the Kaaba itself. So how are we, when we see all this blood spilling, how are we going to make this about a building, as important as that building is to us, as important as it is? The human being is the priority. Don't lose sight of that. Humanize, because the game is played in a way in which the priority is to dehumanize you. Do you not get that? The priority is to dehumanize you. Only when you are dehumanized can all these things happen without anybody batting an eyelid. In fact, perhaps even cheering. And you see this on social media. And it's so unfortunate and it's so worrisome that all these normal human beings can applaud and cheer for these massacres and this bloodshedding that we're seeing in Gaza today. And it isn't just turning your backs on you as far as the politicians and the media. It's cheerleading for the killing and the destruction. And it's not just that. It's giving what I would call material support, a term they like to use. Material support for that kind of state terrorism. $8 billion were given immediately as military aid. The largest warship in the world ever created was sailed into the waters off of the coast of Israel, the Mediterranean, and a second one for good measure, and a fleet as well. Gazans don't have a single ship or plane or fighter jet or tank. But the United States is sending the largest warship that was ever created. And the people, the human beings there, are being bombarded, shellacked. And we can't even get our media, our politicians to express sympathy. This isn't hard. That low bar is hard, apparently, in this time and in this age. And so I want to start to conclude the conversation, open it up to questions and answers. I don't want to create an atmosphere of despair, because remember who's in charge. This is the test before us. In a second, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can flip things around. It's not hard for Allah. Nothing is difficult for God. Kun fayakun. This is the test that we are in. How we respond to it matters. We shouldn't lose our principles and our values. We shouldn't fall into despair. If you fall into despair, you don't have trust in God. Then you think your will is better, or what you know or see is kinder or more merciful than your own Lord. Don't go there. Don't fall into despair. Number two, don't lose your principles as a result of the stress test that we're under. Don't begin to lose respect for all human life. Honor all human life, even if the other side doesn't do that. We do that. We do that. Don't hate. We have a heart that has so much room for love of humanity has no room for hate. It's not about hate. It's about love for justice. Always keep it positive. Keep it proactive. You can say, I hate injustice. I have a better term. You love justice. I hate oppression. Fine. You love freedom. Let people know what you stand for. It's easy to talk about what you stand against, but when you stand for something, that is the best way to stand against it anyway, against its opposite. Don't lose your values. Don't lose your principles. Number two. So don't lose despair or faith in Allah or trust in God. Don't lose the values. And number two, be laser focused. Have that discipline, that sabr. The long way. It's about the long way. People will come. People are coming to the light of all walks of life, even Jewish people. I received a call from a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi. We started off on the wrong footing a few weeks ago when there was an incident with my colleague who's here. And I went over to his center to confront him about it. And he attempted to clarify the situation and gave me a heartfelt apology. A conversation ensued. We talked about the challenges between the communities, and we talked about our faith principles. And we walked out closer to friends than enemies. And he called me. And this guy is a major leader in the Orthodox Jewish community. He called me a couple of days ago in my office, and he said, look, there's a lot of hurt in my community right now, but I'm only calling to tell you I'm thinking about the hurt in yours. And his voice was cracking, and it felt genuine. And I know a lot of them. They're calling me. They're talking to me. They reject what's happening in their name. And I see on YouTube, I see on Facebook, I see these videos. I saw a man the other day in a pizzeria or some kind of restaurant who confronted Ron DeSantis, the presidential hopeful for the GOP ticket. And this guy's been nuts. He's always been nuts, but he's been extra nuts. I speak here in my own capacity. And he even declared an emergency law or something in Florida as a result of the hoax that was Jihad Day that everybody was talking about that never happened because it was always a hoax. There's a lot of campaign of disinformation, the beheading of the 40 babies, the rape, all that stuff. I mean, atrocities have occurred, but there's a lot of disinformation being added on top of it to create that reaction and to create that distraction that hopefully in their mind causes people to accept the war crimes and accept and bless the plundering of Gaza and the murder of more civilians there. That's the point of all of this. And so this Jewish gentleman confronted Ron DeSantis and said, I don't stand for what happened in Israel. I condemn it, but I also condemn what's happening in Gaza. And why are you standing so strongly with what's happening? Why can't you speak against it? And the other guy, DeSantis, attempted to blabber some meaningless response, and the man insisted. And he said, I saw on Al Jazeera what is happening. Why isn't it on American television? And DeSantis said, oh, it's Al Jazeera, it's funded by these Middle East. He said, look, I don't care who's funded by it. Are these videos true or false? I saw it with my own eyes. And they went in it back and forth, and when the man realized he was going nowhere, he said, you lost my vote. I was going to vote for you. You lost my vote. And he walked away. There are people of conscience everywhere. And you will see the light, you will see the beauty of this discipline, this sabr, in pursuing truth and justice calmly, smartly, insistently, persistently, consistently. You will see people start to flip. Isn't that what the Prophet Muhammad did? Do you think the Prophet Muhammad had it easy when he started? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He came out of nowhere for these people, right? With a message that went against the grain of that culture, against everything that it had ever known. They didn't only believe in multiple gods. They built their entire culture, society, and economy. The economy of Quraysh was about the pilgrimages and the tourism that came from worshiping these multiple gods. And can't come this man who's essentially weak. He's an orphan. He's a merchant. He's not exactly a warlord or anything like that. He doesn't have an army or a militia, or he's just a man with some words coming out of nowhere, challenging this entire system. And everybody turned against him. And he had it hard. He had it very hard. But one by one, little by little, being alive to truth, never, ever losing trust in God or faith in God, accepting God's will, and being the friend, the ally of both truth and patience, discipline, kept working. One by one, 100 by 100, afwajan, groups by groups. By the time this singular man passed away, the entire Arabian subcontinent, the Arabian Peninsula rather, had flipped, had moved from that darkness to the light that he was calling for. That is the example that we have. Do you believe in that example? Do you believe in this man and his power? Do you believe in the example he left for you and for me? Don't look for any other examples. Don't look for the example of the angry or the vicious or the vengeful. That wasn't your prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was stronger than that. You think vengeance is strong? There's something stronger. You think anger and all that is strong? There's something stronger. There's faith, there's trust, and there's discipline. And it's calm, but it's strong. Calmness doesn't mean weakness. It's persistent. Find a way. Find a way. Now let's get to the specifics. When you're asked to contact somebody who is an elected official, contact them, find the time, make the point, make it clearly, put some thought into it. A little act. It will make a difference. We had 16 or 20, whatever, members of the local Illinois Congress sign a fair letter, right? In this environment, in this extremely biased environment, one-sided environment, a fair letter. And they were attacked for being fair. They were attacked. We got wind of this and we organized to call them and give them some moral support. They were so thankful, so thankful. It was like they were thirsty. They got a glass of water. Do you realize if you stay in that bubble, that rally, that mosque, that community, and that's all this is where you vent your feelings and this is it, that these things are passing us by. We need to get involved, right? When this happened, now they became, I believe, sort of relieved and feeling like, you know what, maybe I did the right thing. And before this happened, at least one of them had issued an apology for being fair. You saw the Onion articles that make fun of the New York Times. We apologize for being fair and covering both sides of the story and Palestinian lives and lost lives. It was an Onion article. It's closer to the truth, quite frankly. One of them had essentially apologized for being fair. But we're able to have an action that shows solidarity with those who stand with us. There's just one, right? If you're asked to contact someone, if you're asked to write to a media, do it. I read an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and I was very generous in my comments. The guy from Evanston wrote the article. It was horrible. I tore him apart, quite frankly, in my response. And he called me, and I did a little bit more of that. And I was very clear. When I say tear apart, I didn't swear, I wasn't yelling, I wasn't cursing, but I was pretty severe in how laser focused I was and pretty merciless in analyzing how his article was unfair and biased. Down to the nitty-gritty. And he couldn't get around it. He tried, he couldn't, right? Down. So you mentioned 1,200 who were killed in Israel. That's good that you mentioned that. But you mentioned nothing about the numbers in Gaza. Your article gives me the impression that nobody died there. Why? You're a journalist. It's not your job to try to shape minds. It's your job to try to report the facts, let people make their own what's happening. This is not journalism, and this is a failure of your singular duty to report on the facts. Well, I did say that there were, an attack. I'm like, that's a qualitative statement. You gave a quantitative statement on the other hand. You need to give it here too. Double that number is what we're seeing right now. And for you to not even mention it, even though it's very much the context of this story, is for you to shape the minds of the reader, and it is a biased approach to journalism. And that was just one little example. There's so many. I'm not going to spend my time chanting and yelling. I'm going to call these people. It's fine to go to rallies. I don't want to shoot down rallies. Fine. But don't stop there. Don't think that is where it's at. Okay? Engage. If you have a teacher, if you have a principal, if you have a coworker or an employer or a local elected official or a journalist in your vicinity who is saying something that is unfair, unjust, that touches you and your families, get ready to respond. If you need help responding, talking points, etc., we have templates. Just hit me up. I'll respond. I've been doing this all day. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, with facts, with truth. Just keep speaking the truth to these people, to everybody, to yourselves, to your families. Now, let me close it up, and I think it's fitting, as hard as this is, to relate to you the words of one of the Palestinian victims, the last words, because, you know, we talked about the martyrs and we talked about the lives lost, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about, as an Egyptian, as a human being, you know, I'm in awe of Palestinian resilience. You know, whoever's Palestinian here, you have a very resilient people. What you've been through is incredible. And the fact that you're still standing, the fact that there's still schools and hospitals and family structures and working fathers and caring mothers and weddings and all of these things, despite almost no one standing with you, is as resilient as I've ever seen. And that's inspirational on a human level. Okay? And here we have a woman in Gaza. And again, brothers and sisters, never, ever allow anyone to make you forget the human stories or to get you distracted from putting up your human stories. Again, I want to emphasize that more than anything. This is a woman who was an artist. And despite the difficulty of living in Gaza, essentially, an open air prison of despair, right? An open air prison where hope ought to die. This woman dedicated her life to trying to find beauty, color and light through her art. She created beautiful art. And she shared that brightness with others through this joyful art. And her last post that she put out was before electricity went out, unfortunately, extinguishing, that beautiful light and that color that she had, not just that day, but forever, because the next day she was killed along with her children by an air raid. And her last post, I think, speaks to the heart of the human story in Gaza. Oh God, this was her post on Facebook. We entrust you with hearts grieved by separation. Oh God, heal the brokenness of our hearts and make us patient with your judgment and destiny. Oh God, be with us and strengthen us and increase our patience and reward us for our patience. Oh God, bind our hearts, for they cannot be strong or relied on except by you. اللهم نستودعك قلوبا مفجوعة بالفراق. اللهم أجبر كسر قلوبنا واجعلنا لقضائك وقدرك صابرين. يا رب كن معنا وقونا وزدنا صبرا وآجرنا على صبرنا. اللهم أربط على قلوبنا فإنها لا تقوى ولا تستنى إلا بك. That was her last post. So even when they take our lives, they don't take our faith, they don't take our trust, we leave with them. And you know what I believe, as sad a story as this is? I mean, we're all going to go, right? No one's going to stay. So what's sad and what's happy? This woman, inshallah, and her children will be in a house and a garden of color, light, and brightness that no one can extinguish, and no one can air raid, and no one can bomb the gardens of Allah, inshallah. And we keep that sabr, we keep that trust, whatever happens. People don't have that power over you. Only God does. Keep it straight, keep it real. Go through the trial and tribulations with Allah by your side, and there will be vindication. Her last words were, vindicate us. Allah does vindicate. If not here, then in the akhirah. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.